once in a while, there comes along an album that just completely changes everything, and Slayer's Reign in Blood is probably the most important one in metal's history, in my opinion. Well, hello my friends, we meet again. It has been a while. Where should we begin? Now, today we are taking a look at Slayer's Reign in Blood. Now, I know you may have seen the title of this video here now, and before you begin to light me up in the comments, let me explain. We all know that Black Sabbath invented heavy metal. This is an indisputable fact. And to be the first to do something is certainly an extremely important thing. So I can see arguments that Black Sabbath, or perhaps Paranoid is the most important metal album of all time. But, you know, do people really consider the Carl Benz patent Motorwagen the most important automobile or car? Maybe, but I think most people would consider the Ford Model T, which would come several decades later, to be the most important car in history. And this is sort of the metaphor that I want to use with you guys here. And in a way, I see Reign in Blood as the Model T of the metal world, right? The most important album in the development of metal as a whole. And just like the Model T, you can sort of separate it into pre and post Model T car design. Just as metal, you can split up into pre and post Reign in Blood metal albums, in my opinion. And with the album turning 40 years old this year, which is crazy, it is becoming easier to sort of parse out the historical context and impact that this album had and continues to have, actually. Now, for context, even though I'm about to massively glaze this album beyond belief, I'm actually not that big of a Slayer fan, and this is not even my favorite Slayer album. I was always a huge Megadeth fanboy, and honestly, even for years, I did not even like the band. After, at a Megadeth show when I was about 14, a guy in a Slayer shirt came up to me and called me my buddy.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're...
And honestly, I hung on to that grudge for a long time and, you know, held on to the band for that. But as I've gotten older and, you know, forgiven that part, I guess, forgiven that guy for felting me and my friend so hard, I began to appreciate Slayer more and more. But as time has gone by and I've gotten much deeper into the history, songwriting, and production of metal music for this channel, the more I've come to actually appreciate Slayer themselves, right? The swagger of this album will not be denied despite all my grudges that I want to hold on to. Now, of course, 1986 was a massive year for metal beyond Slayer, right? And maybe in a future video, we'll take a look at the impact of that year itself, right? Some of those albums that came out. And maybe you could consider 1986 simply the inflection point in metal. But to me, it essentially set the template for the next 40 years. So let me explain to you guys what I mean by that. But before I start off, if you'd like my bi-weekly glaze of various metal albums, make sure you hit that like button and consider subscribing. I really appreciate that. By the way, you guys should check out my band Mestea's first single. The first music video for the song Soul Sickness just dropped today. That song is played at over 200 BPM, the whole song, so I think you'll really like it if you like fast Slayer stuff. It's sort of melodic death metal. Go check it out. Link is down in the description, guys. Now, there are a few reasons why I consider Reign in Blood to be the first modern metal album, and there isn't one standout reason. Rather, this album is sort of like right at the apex of several important factors and trends which were developing in metal, and they just sort of nailed it and went from there, right? And in a way, this album is really not all that original at all, right? You can draw strings of evidence all over the board. You know, X did this first, and Y did this first, but to me, Reign in Blood is the most important metal album of all because of all these smaller elements of production, drumming, seriousness of tone, riffing style, energy, tightness, and many, many other factors sort of all came together to produce an album which absolutely still holds up today, and it's just such a masterpiece of production and playing. It's so good, right? There are probably hundreds of thousands of bands directly influenced by this album, and even more bands that are indirectly influenced by them because bands that they are influenced by Reign in Blood. Clear as mud? Now, the first and most obvious one to me is the production of the album itself. And looking back at the list of albums from 1986, you know, all these albums basically sound like 80s albums. And not that that's a bad thing at all, right? I love a lot of these records. I love the huge reverbs, gated snares, and more sort of round production style. I find it very, very charming. But Reign in Blood immediately stands out from all the rest of these, right? To me, this sounds immediately timeless.
irrational man.
The band could release an album that sounds like this today, and I don't really think anybody would bat an eye or get upset about the production at all. It really just stands the test of time. And this to me is sort of like the benchmark for metal. And again, we're going back to the Ford Model T comparison, right? Where the cars beforehand were these huge, powerful, beautiful, and extravagant pieces of art, right? But do you really need all that for a car to move people around? That is what Slayer themselves and their producer, Rick Rubin, and engineer Andy Wallace did to metal here in Rain and Blood, right? It's refinement through simplicity.
The only way to exit is going piece by piece.
It is almost elegant in a way compared to a lot of the other peers of its time, right? Elegantly violent, I guess you could say. They stripped back everything, and it feels like it's a scalpel, a very sharp scalpel, rather than these sort of round, beautiful pieces, right? Kerry King would say, when I hear fast music like Metallica and the sounds are big sounds, the whole thing gets blurry and you can't really hear it, end quote. And honestly, guys, like I said, this album still sounds relatively modern today, and you can see the immediate impact it had on the metal world just by listening to the albums which would come out afterwards, 1987, 88, into the 90s.
Dear mother, dear father, what is this tale?
It's pretty clear to me that today's metal sounds much closer to Rain and Blood than it does Master of Puppets. And I love Master of Puppets too, don't get me wrong, right? Just based on sheer production sound alone. Beyond some subgenres where the entire goal and point is to have production sort of be an intentional lower quality to achieve an artistic effect, right? Rain and Blood is really the standard for metal, pretty much for the last 40 years, in my opinion, right? The guitars and drumming still sounds fantastic and impressive to this day just because of how tightly it's played. Now, secondly, this album is very serious and extremely dark in tone. You know, this is sort of like a harder concept to put into words, right? And it's not that there weren't serious albums before. Of course, you would have Celtic Frost, Bathory, Merciful Fate, Slayer themselves, Creator Venom, and many others taking a look at these sort of dark, macabre, you know, themes and other things like that, right? You know, evil and all that stuff that we love to talk about. Evilness, metal, it all goes hand in hand together. Yet when looking back at the albums preceding Rain and Blood, even around the same time, even Slayer's own releases before this, I guess the best way I could put it is it almost seems like low-budget horror film vibes before this, right? Yes, it's all evil and dark, but the lack of production, I guess, sort of obscures the darkness about it, kind of makes it almost cheesy and goofy, I guess, to put it in like a simple way. But to me, Rain and Blood, like even today, doesn't really have an ounce of cheese in it. It is completely cheeseless, one could say. Like the album cover, the music sort of has this like remorseless, pained, and sterile depiction of like the inherent darkness and evil within human nature and the fascination around it. It's really interesting. I love the artwork of it.
Auschwitz, the meaning of pain, the way that I want you to die. Slow down, immense decay.
Of course, the best example of this has to be the opener, Angel of Death, which infamously depicts some of the more horrendous experiments of Dr. Josef Mengele, right, Nazi physician. And you know, demons and all that stuff is evil and all that stuff is crazy and cool, I guess, but real life, actual heinous events being talked about carries this sort of serious tone that carries on through the rest of this album. It's very real, I guess it feels in a way, right, compared to other things. Afterwards, right, to me, that sort of has this cold, serious, sterile nature. It really resonates. Probably has a lot to do with the higher budget, much more of a clean and direct production style. But regardless, right, this deathly serious nature of this album sheds basically every ounce of 80s cheese, right? And this would also become a staple of metal going forward, this sort of like direct, sterile depiction of the evils of humanity, right?
Night will come and I will follow. All my victims know tomorrow. Make it.
Now, another factor, and one of the most obvious ones to me that reverberates around the metal world even until today, is Dave Lombardo's drumming, right? Double bass has always been part of metal. Judas Priest, Motorhead, Slayer themselves, etc., Metallica. There was a lot of sick double bass parts in songs prior to this album. And again, I'm not saying Slayer sort of reinvented the wheel here, but to me, on Rain and Blood is where metal drumming itself became a central draw and listening feature in metal music. Again, this sort of all goes back to the extremely tight and clean production. You can hear everything he is doing, so you are able to listen and appreciate everything, right? It only takes a frenzied performance like what Dave Lombardo would put down here to really make it a central draw for the album. You want to listen to how crazy and clean his playing is. His double bass is just so satisfying to listen to. And it took a person like Rick Rubin to realize this obvious fact as well, right? The drums, because of him, are mixed really, really loud. It just sounds amazing. The flurry of double bass, that ride cymbal sounds so good. The double time snare and the opening of Angel of Death. It may just be like the most important 30 seconds in all metal history, that opening there, especially in extreme metal, just so influential. Like guys, I hope you can understand what I'm trying to say here, right? Not only did Rain and Blood set the standard for drum sounds and performances itself, but is also, in my eyes, legitimately turned drums, which of course before this were sort of like being a percussion rhythm element of the song, you know, a support role, turned it into like a legitimate element of interest, of hooks and music, metal music going forward. And honestly, this trend has been started 4 decades ago by this and has only gotten more and more and more as you have more hard-hitting, frenzied, fast, creative drummers that keep pushing this metal drums arm race. And honestly, even today here, Rain and Blood, it still stands out. It's just still amazingly precise, tight and cleanly played album. It still sounds really good today. And I think a lot of this sort of metal, extreme drumming being a focus of a lot of albums really started here on Rain and Blood. This is a really important part of extreme metal, if you haven't already realized that, I guess. Now I just want to touch quickly on the solos of this album here. And in my opinion, one of the things which has aged and maybe dates the album the most here is the soloing of Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman. Recently, a clip that has been circulating of Slayer rehearsing the songs for Rain and Blood that I mentioned earlier, and afterwards the band goes into like an interview about it after and sort of talks about their philosophy and stuff. In that interview, both Kerry and Jeff talk about how they don't really plan their leads, and they just essentially go into the studio and improvise based on what the music makes them feel in the moment. I'm paraphrasing this here, you know, please go watch it, and it's just such a treasure. I've said this before, but man, is this such a gem in metal history.
That's how you get a, big variety of different leads. Find the one that best fits the lead. The way we do it, we just put them down until we find one we like.
When they said that, it got me thinking, right? And yeah, okay, yeah, maybe these solos aren't the most impressive, not the most shreddy, not the most, I guess, exciting to listen to melodically, right? But they sort of fit the album thematically, right? It sounds like a person screaming out in agony, right? So if you think about it, when you go into the studio and you're trying to record a guitar solo, what are you trying to do beyond show off your musical skills, right? You're trying to enhance the song by, I guess, condensing the themes and emotions of the song into about a 30-second guitar solo. At least to me, that's what makes a really great solo great, right? You can condense the meaning and impact of the song or add to it in about like 30 seconds, right? But what they are, right, is essentially a person screaming out in agony, in rage at the top of their lungs, but played through a guitar, and that's what makes it great. The music is angry, it's aggressive, it's panic-stricken, it's frantic, and that is the way that it sort of makes you feel when you listen to it. So that is how they represented it through the guitar solos. And once I sort of changed this mental framework about these solos when listening to them, all of a sudden it makes a whole lot more sense and a whole lot more enjoyable to listen to. So, still maybe the weakest point on the album, but let's be honest here, right? Nobody really listens to this album for the solo work. What they do listen to it is for the riffage, and the riffage in Rain and Blood is just so incredibly influential that I honestly cannot even begin to describe which bands, as basically every single metal band, extreme metal band in the last 40 years, large or small, has been influenced by this record to a huge degree. And This is what makes it such an incredibly important record, because what Slayer managed to do here was to keep the intensity of earlier hardcore punk bands, but essentially strip all the punk rock out of it. Yes, it is fast and there are power chords all over the place, but once again, right, when the punk is completely removed, all that is left is this sort of just dank metal riffing. I wonder how many influential riffs I can name here. Let's just start with a few. For one, the bridge riff in Angel of Death has gotten so many modern metalcore bands, hardcore bands, thrash bands. They all owe their careers to riffage like this. Or what about the chromatic chug riff in the beginning of Piece by Piece? You know, this riff, or like a style that was very similar to this riff, would later be used by Suffocation to basically create an entire new subgenre of death metal that'd be slam. This riff is just like that. The frenzied chromatic trem-picking riff of Necrophobic and Altar of Sacrifice, all of which would be inspirational for the thousands of death and black metal bands going forward after this.
Ripping apart, severing flesh, gouging eyes, tearing limb from limb.
And how could we forget that opening section in Jesus Saves? It transitions into one of the first, I guess you could say, modern breakdowns, in my opinion. There are a lot of breakdowns on this album. And man, is it ever stank-face inducing now as it is back then? Or how about the middle section of Criminally Insane? Most notably here would be how Chuck Schuldiner of Death would essentially recreate this riff many, many times on the first few Death albums. Just think of how many bands are influenced by those records, so it just keeps on going, right? The entire ending section of Postmortem too. And of course, we cannot forget, right, the finale, Raining Blood, maybe one of the most influential songs in all of metal history, right up there with War Pigs, Paranoid, Children of the Grave, Ace of Spades, Overkill, Painkiller, you know, Electric Eye, The Trooper, Master of Puppets. How many insanely sick moments can we name here? First, we have the intro riff. Harmonized in fifths, Chuck Schuldiner, Take Notice. Then we have the riff directly following that, which, if the triplet chugs over top of double bass, isn't just, you know, metal at the very definition of it. I don't know what is. How many bands have used that? Then they have the crazy super fast chromatic riff after it, which ruined many a Guitar Hero 3 run. That's just crazy death metal stuff there as well. I also love on this song how they reuse the same riffs sort of over and over again, but just put double bass underneath it and slightly change it. Absolutely bass. And of course, we can't forget maybe the most influential part of this entire album. And that, of course, is the Raining Blood breakdown. And yes, it is still just as heavy as ever, still just as bass as ever. And I love how they interweave the main riff motif into the breakdown with the power chords afterwards. Just so incredibly sick. And then it's equally as sick as a transition from that breakdown riff with the melody all into power chords. Just so cool, man. That whole breakdown section is just, it's just so heavy. It honestly sounds like riffs you would hear released on stuff today. Like, these riffs don't sound old. These riffs sound modern. They sound fresh. They sound new. And this album is 40 years old, guys. Have I convinced you yet? All right, but you know, we talked about basically everything, so let's talk about the vocals here. Now, you guys know how much I value hearing protection, whether you are a musician or you just enjoy music, going to concerts, or if you want to crank your gear at home up really, really loud, you need some really good hearing protection, and that is what today's video sponsor Hears offers. Now, Hears offers premium earplugs that come with 13 to 20 decibels of volume attenuation, which is a great amount for protecting your hearing. Now, normally when you wear cheap earplugs, everything sort of sounds muffled, the sound gets a little bit distorted, but Hears, the filters inside these essentially act as second eardrums, which allows you to lower the overall volume going into your ears, but still retain all that clarity and detail that you want when you go to a concert or when you are playing with your bandmates together, right? Now they're very, very comfortable. I like how they come with different sized earpieces so you can fit your ears, whatever size ear hole you have. I really like that I have different colors here as well. And what I also really, really like and think is great that they come with a little keychain attachment and that goes over the nice little carrying case that they have. So you'll never forget your earplugs when you go to the Crowbar concert. Ask me how I know. Now, a portion of every sale goes to the Hearing Health Foundation to help cure hearing loss, which is great. I love to see that. And if you click my link down in the pinned comment and description, you get 10% off your order with Hears. So thank you for them for sponsoring this video. Really appreciate it, guys. Big shout out to Hears. Much like the solos, I think this may be the quote unquote weak link of the album here. Not that I don't enjoy Tom's singing. In fact, I think his high pitched screams are some just like the greatest moments in all of metal, which I wish bands would actually have the balls to sort of bring that back. Tom's singing is great for thrash metal, which of course is what this album is, right? That's what it's supposed to be at its core. But to me, I look back at the vocals here as the sort of one grounding feature, right? It keeps this album from moving into the absolute extreme metal category. Tom's menacing snarl and the way it almost seems to struggle to keep up in faster sections is just so full of humanity and charm.
My simple lyric, nothing holds stops that's behind it. Scouts within my mind commits tearing at my sanity. Vessels in my brain carry death unto my back.
It's almost like symbolic, like the lone human voice drowning in this dark and cruel metal world that was created, like on the cover. Really cool. I also think that, replace the vocals with death growls. This album is essentially a death metal album. Replace it with black metal sort of esque shrieks. It essentially becomes black metal, right? Give it a hardcore vocalist, and this album would just become like a hardcore record. Rain and Blood and the sounds that Slayer managed to achieve here essentially become like the default sound for extreme metal going forward in a lot of cases here. That's why this is so incredibly influential and the most important album in my opinion. Every band since has had to contend with this looming giant which came before it, and whether or not you are consciously listening to it to try to emulate or to take inspiration from its sounds, the other bands you listen to almost certainly have. I've been Varvis. Thank you for watching, you guys. As always, let the metal flow, and if you want me to sort of glaze any more albums, leave that down below. Really appreciate you guys. Have a great rest of your day.